Is going on, guys? Hey, I wanted to come to you this evening and bring to you a little more Steven Crowder. And in this episode, Steven Crowder is talking to a college professor of hip hop. I think he said at Princeton. I don't know where they're at now. I don't think they're at Princeton. I forgot they could be. I forgot where they were though. Where they are though. But anyways, they're talking about affirmative action, and Stephen is saying that affirmative action is racist, and he's asking people to change his mind. And I definitely understand to a degree what he's saying, because right off the bat, because again, affirmative action, having affirmative action type policies is based on the idea, not so much income or whatever. I mean, I guess that plays a factor into a lot of these things, but they want to have a certain number of, let's say, black people, or a certain number of women, or a certain number of whatever. And Stephen kind of lays out with this professor about how in a lot of ways that's not only unfair, but it's unjust to the people that are being discriminated against, like Asian Americans. But it also is unjust to the people that actually get accepted because of affirmative action, because they may not be as qualified to be there. I think white people need to have scores of 1310 to get in somewhere like Harvard, and 1310 for white, 1100 or 1150 or something for blacks, and I think it's 1350 for Asians. So it's like, and again, we have no problem saying that the white Americans have to score higher because of their privilege, supposed privilege. But when it comes to Asians, we feel the way too. And across the board, is it a good idea? But anyways, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and put this up, and if you would, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I really appreciate those I already have. Thank you.
Some kind of system that says, let's reach out to the Spanish community, black community, Asian community, right? And they do that. And then the most Asians are scoring, or they are qualifying to be in that place. Now the school is white, Asian. So how do we get more Latinos and how do we add more diversity to the program? So if
you're talking
those people
racial
are not
diversity.
if those people are not getting the qualifications or the scores that it takes to get into school, then something needs to be applied for that to happen. So the school meets the quota. Affirmative action sets that up.
Okay, so you support the idea of racial quotas to promote racial diversity.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it.
I mean, I just want to make sure, because you just said quotas.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it racial.
Okay.
Because.
So what would you call specifically?
Yeah, if you're reaching out to people specifically based on their race or ethnicity or whatever, or gender, that is what it is. You can call it whatever you want, but and no disrespect to this professor here, but you can call it whatever you want, but that is what it is. It's a quota. It's a quota based on race, or based on, gender, or, ethnicity, but that is what it is.
Allowing a black person in with lower credentials because they're black, if not racial. What would you call that?
Offhand, man, I would just say it's offering an opportunity to someone who would never have the chance to do that kind of.
But they do have the chance. by meeting the same criteria. So let me kind of present to you.
They don't come from a place where they're if they grow up in an environment that doesn't allow them, first of all, to grow with their environment, to move into, to be surrounded by the thing that gives them a certain kind of knowledge where they can learn these things to get into the schools. Right? We take tests sometimes. As a black person in certain schools,
you're still a black person, from what I understand.
We take tests to get in.
You didn't do a Rachel Dolezal, did you? You've always been black.
Right. So we take these tests to get into a certain place. If I fail the test, man, I got to go back.
Yeah.
But how do I learn how?
But that's the same thing that happens with white people.
But how do them too? How do people learn to take tests to qualify them to get into the place? If it's never going to happen, then we need to.
Well, it's already happening. So let me address kind of your point. So you were saying a school is entirely white. Okay. First off, I disagree with your premise of diversity for diversity's sake is a virtue. I don't think so. I think that intellectual diversity is more important. And by the way, that's much more lacking on campus than racial diversity, intellectual diversity.
Yep. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, you have 40% of all university campuses with not a single Republican or conservative professor at all. 40%. You can't find 40% of any schools that don't have a single black professor. You can't find probably 5% that don't have a single black professor or a single lesbian professor. So intellectual diversity is more important. But to go to that point, you're presupposing that if a school is entirely white, which has never really been the case, by the way.
That's one thing I really want to talk about for just a second is the fact that there aren't a whole lot of conservative professors at universities. And, one thing I think myself when I think of this stuff is certain narratives. And again, I've been around, college campuses, professors. I didn't go back to college and graduate from college until I was in my early 30s. But, but I was surrounded with my siblings. I met my wife. She went to college with my brother. And, there's a certain mindset at universities that Republicans, conservatism is wrong, is bad. And the fact is there's a certain idea, a certain mode of thinking, and if you deviate from them, there was conservative people I met at the college, but most were not. Most were very, liberal and open to certain things, which is great. But there was no accountability in certain things. There was no, which I think is really lacking as far as there was no accountability. Everyone had a view that certain people, certain groups were victims, were women, black people, brown people, gay people, even 20 plus years ago, were thought of as somehow as victims of everyone of the mean, bad white man. And I think there's a certain narrative. So I think that culture kind of breeds other people that feel that same way, and that's taught and then they grow up and they finish their degrees, they get masters and doctorates, and they go on to teach at the colleges, and it's like, so there's not a whole lot of diversity of thought at colleges, and that's one thing I definitely agree with.
Matter of fact, black enrollment in higher tier universities like Ivy League is lower now than 35 years ago, pre-affirmative action.
Agreed.
So affirmative action has had a net negative effect on black enrollment at higher education. So I don't agree with the premise that it's all white by design. Mm-hmm. So I can't possibly agree with the next premise, which is we need to create X% a quota of black people by design. I can't, because it wasn't by design that there were majority white people. Just like it's not by design that Asian Americans, who have disproportionately faced discrimination. And I don't want to compare discrimination of black Americans to Asian Americans, but certainly internment camps and the immigration policies against people from China were very, very severe. I don't believe that they should now be forced to meet higher standards, even though they faced the same kind of systemic discrimination, solely because without any quotas, they were outperforming white people. So an example right now, when we talk about racial diversity, a white male can score lower. So we all go, okay, it should be okay for a black person to score lower than an Asian and get into the same university. That's what people, I don't agree with it. But the unintended consequences are an Asian female right now has to score higher than a white male. Solely because Asian Americans have typically performed well in standardized testing. They have done very well with extracurriculars. And you know the reason for that? They faced discrimination. They faced extreme poverty and first-generation immigrants. They have very strong nuclear family households and a strong emphasis on that. And this is something that we talked about before with black Americans. When you look at this and you go, okay, why are there fewer black enrollees right now in university, top-tier universities than before? Especially when you look at the fact that a black female with a higher education degree will actually make more than a white female. So the gap is closed in certain ways. But the disparity comes from, let me ask you this, do you know what the single biggest socioeconomic indicator is of, it's not even close, Barack Obama said this, every stat that we have reflects that the biggest indicator we have of whether you graduate high school, whether you end up in prison, whether you go to a good college, whether you make a good living, whether you have healthy relationships, dual parent households, a mom and a dad still actively engaged in the household. Black Americans in the 1960s had a 25% single parent household rate, or fatherless household rate. Today that's nearly 80. Compared to 25% with white America, or 30% with white Americans, and much lower with Asian Americans and Latin Americans. That is a startling trend. And that will put black young men at an extreme disadvantage. And so you have to ask why. And the reason why was because of Lyndon Johnson. I'm sure you remember this. My dad's from Detroit, as well. The Model Cities program started in Detroit. And the welfare program, which incentivized single-parent households and was marketed toward black people. And so you go from really strong family structures in the black community, much more so than the white community for a long time, that slowly degraded until today. And that's a more important economic and social factor than even a higher education degree. And we're trying to correct it with affirmative action at university by the time the problem's already begun. And we're trying to correct it with affirmative action, which very much parallels the model cities and the welfare program, in that it's trying to right the wrongs of the past with systemic discrimination toward the future, people of other races. And that's why I don't think that it's morally correct. And I would presuppose that's why the results haven't yielded what we thought affirmative action would.
I can agree with that. I don't think it did any justice. But now I'm starting to think more about. I mean, it could be racist.
What could be racist?
Affirmative action.
Yes.
But
he's saying, so now he's starting to agree that affirmative action, could be racist. And yeah, I mean, kind of feel the same way. It's like, and not only in so many ways is it detrimental towards, harmful to white people and Asian people and other groups, but in a lot of ways it's harmful to black and brown communities. And, it's definitely not helping the black community. I mean, he brought up the Model Cities program. Yeah, I mean, again, in 1965, there was right about 25% of black households were did have a mother and a father. So majority of about 75% of all black households, 55 years ago or thereabouts, about 75% were both parents. And the problem with it now is reversed. I mean, the trend is, again, we're talking 75% of people of black households don't have both parents. And the problem with that is, again, we've seen over and over again that majority of the prison population grew up in households without a father present. And, that is the single most, as we're seeing here, that's the single most determining factor of the success of a person is what kind of household they grew up in. And again, there could be, he does kind of point out the fact that it is, supportive mother and father. Again, if you grew up in a household where you had, both parents around, but they were there on drugs and beating the crap out of their kids or whatever. And, that probably wouldn't yield much better results, if any better results. But stable two-family households, and they talk about this here, and again, that the Bonnell cities program that he's talking about encouraged, kind of single mothers, single black mother. It encouraged that, welfare and everything else. I mean, it encouraged women to be single because if they were married and they relied somewhat on the man's income, they didn't get the amount in welfare that they would have gotten. So, I think it sets up a very and there are more factors within that I could expound on further. But I'm going to go back to this so you can hear what they have to say.
I thought you were saying it could be racist and pointing at someone. I was like, what?
No, but when I questioned that, that's what I was curious about. It made me come up here in the first place. I didn't think it was. But putting these things in place the way you're saying it, both of them could stand met side by side. It is and it isn't, depending on how you look at it. Who are you? What kind of information do you have that these things, that you can say that both these things can stand side by side, and in comparison, yes or no, yay or nay, good or bad, right? Real quick, man, do you remember the study? There was a study in New York where the black, white, Asian kids went to the same school. Mm-hmm. Whites scored higher than the Asians. I want to say blacks were second. So when whites, blacks, Asians. Yeah. During the summers over a 4-year period, the Asians went to school and studied and read more during the summers. Mm-hmm. They were first. Mm-hmm. 2 years in, it was Asians, blacks, and whites. By the end of the 4-year period, it was Asians, whites, and blacks. Yeah. Somewhere along the line, something changes. Mm-hmm. And it could be the fact that no one's pushing, or not enough people are pushing for the black kids to continue outside of the institution.
Fathers.
Right? It could be.
But it's definitely,
I don't come from that. I come from a one-parent household. Mm-hmm.
And just a mom?
Yeah, and I grew up quick. I had my mom was working 11 to 7, 3 to 11, these crazy.
That's very impressive. And I'm sure you understand you're a statistical anomaly because a lot of black men who didn't have fathers, they ended up in the system, so to speak.
Exactly. Dead, locked up, kids, real bad off. All my friends were that way. To this day, I could probably name about 5, not even, man, three cats I know who didn't go to jail.
Right. Let me ask you this. This is a personal question. How much compared to, because you're a professor, you're successful, you teach, do you teach at Princeton as well, or here?
I'm at Princeton.
Oh, Princeton, and then you teach here, okay, so hip-hop.
Here in the fall, and then.
Wow, okay, so very accomplished. That's not statistically very typical of, by the way, not only black people, but white people without dads. Yeah, white people, Asian people without dads, across the board. But let me ask you this: with how successful you are and what you've seen, mentioning your friends who've ended up in prison, which is tragic. It really is tragic. And I think there's a whole argument for prison reform. And I'm actually very happy what Donald Trump has done with nonviolent drug offenders, letting some black people free, which was a big deal. Anyway, sorry, we'll get back to that. I'm getting sidetracked now. How much of an advantage do you think it would be compared to everything else, affirmative action, welfare programs, any other government program that they've created to try and help black Americans? Would you agree that having a dad in your household who supported you would be a much greater factor in your ability to thrive as a child than a government program? Having a dad there who was there for you and supported you, how big of an impact do you think that would have made?
I'm not sure, man, because the variables are very different. Let's just say this: my father's no longer here, but he also wasn't in my life.
Right.
If my father was in my life, I may not be sitting here talking to you. I could have taken the route that he took, whether he was in the house or not. There's also a job you need to do.
Well, okay, I'm assuming a good supportive father is what I'm saying. If you had a good supportive father who took care of your mother and took care of you in the house, how much of an advantage do you think that would have been compared to your friends?
It would be an incredible advantage, man.
And I will tell you, statistically, that's an advantage. And I recognize this when we talk about privilege as someone who is, whether a Canadian, French Canadian immigrant was born in Detroit, anyway. To me, when I look back, I go, for me, having a mother and a father made such a big impact. And when you look at the statistic across all races, it's consistent. White kids don't do well without a dad. Black kids don't do well. It's just that 77% of black households don't have a dad right now.
Right.
And the problem begins long before they get to university. And so then we implement these effectively racist measures in university and quotas to try and fix a problem that was created by government programs in the first place, is my point. It's the unintended consequences, the ripple effect of creating a real problem with economic disparity.
Yeah, now, real quick, what comes to mind when you say that is, earlier you said that something was not by design. Right?
If a university, because if it was all white, the only way I could agree with your argument is if it was all white only by design, where they had a policy that said only white students.
Okay, now, what you're describing right now, if we go back, and this, I can't even get into I can't pull from the stuff right now because my head is all over the place with this. I didn't expect any of this. But when you look at what was set up in the African American communities at a certain time, this is the 60s, late 50s, 60s, 70s, it was to disrupt the homes of.
Yeah, the welfare programs, the model cities programs, you know what, I don't know that it was
strategic. I'm sorry, I think some of that was strategic.
Many people make the argument that Lyndon Johnson did it deliberately.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
I do, and it was a design.
Yeah.
It was designed to set up things for what's happening today.
Right.
And there might have been some programs that were put in place or implemented to disrupt that.
But here's the thing, right? It was presented by Lyndon Johnson as a gift.
Yep.
Right? It was presented as hey, we're going to fix the problems of the past. We're going to implement welfare. We're going to do central urbanized planning.
Right.
Very similar to the way affirmative action by design is presented as a gift.
If something was not looked at critically, it becomes enabling. And that's what that was. And so some things that are implemented into systems are enabling, and affirmative action may just be that thing. May have some kind of, it lingers, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I want people.
One thing I wanted to point out again right here is, that I definitely disagree with the notion that things that were put into place by the Johnson administration were definitely not helpful to the Black community, into I think America as a whole. But was it done on purpose? Like to hurt Black people? I think that's kind of a hard argument. I think it's got so many layers to kind of get into. I mean, but number one, I agree with Stephen. It was kind of given as a gift. It was something that was given to make up for past discrimination. It's kind of like giving land to Native Americans for reservations. It was something that was given that did not have to be given, and I think the idea was to fix the injustices of the past by many people who championed the idea. But unfortunately, I kind of did the reverse. Again, in the mid 1960s, we went from a 25% black single household, black households from mother and father, for the most part, and now it's reversed. Almost majority of 75, or he says 77%, don't have fathers. And yes, it's a real problem. But again, was it intentional? Did the Johnson administration do that intentionally? Well, again, you would have to also go into the fact that he did that with a lot of pressure from the civil rights community, from the civil rights community, to pass that, to put that into place. So, what if it was intentional? Some of the civil rights leaders probably knew it was intentional. I mean, so if it was intentional, they championed the idea. So what I'm saying is, like, how many layers, how far down do you want to get? If it was intentional, and I'm not saying it was. I don't know if I really truly believe that it was. But one thing I got to bring out that has nothing to do with the conversation. This guy got one killer freaking beard. I mean, he does, But the one thing I've noticed is people around our age group, we have the darker mustaches and grayer beards. I don't know what that's all about, but it's kind of like the way that a lot of guys kind of gray in their facial hair. Same thing with me. It's like I get the darker mustache and the grayer beard. So, but anyways, I'm gonna go a little bit further before I stop it.
Especially, I mean, what was your path like becoming a professor of hip hop? Because that's not a topic I'm super familiar with, by the way.
Well, I'm okay. Grew up in a one-parent household.
Yeah.
My friends and I sold drugs. They've been out of jail. Not me. My mother was very strong, and so I think she had high expectations of me as a child. I was told to do things and expected them to be done when she came home.
Right.
That carried with me all my life. And I watched my friends grow up in the same one-parent household with their mother. When we got into the street, we did whatever we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And they went home and they took whatever they had in the street into the home. I left that shit outside because my mom was going to do what my dad would do. Kick your ass.
Yeah.
So I had a standard to live up to, right?
French Canadian mom's very similar in that way. My mom slapped me around. I don't have much in common with a lot of these white Americans who get a timeout. I was like, that's what you got?
Well, Canadians are cats.
French Canadians, yeah. Okay.
So I didn't go to university. I'm cutting some stuff out, but I didn't go to a university. I had my hands in the street and many different things that created character for me. I learned what was right and wrong, and I learned how to decipher between the two to get what I needed to get to, because people were watching me. Also, I kind of stayed away from certain things that I knew would get me in trouble.
Yeah.
And if I did get in trouble, nobody knew I was getting in trouble, because it's just a street thing.
Yeah.
Right? Don't have a college degree. Didn't go to college.
So how do you become a professor?
Studied what I thought I was supposed to study on my own. I read a lot after I got out of school. I read a lot. Was hungry for information that I wasn't learning in school. This stuff wasn't set up for me in school. It was a place for me to go to work by standard and get out.
Right.
What am I supposed to do? Live by what everybody else says. Go to college, get an education, wife, kid, job, the whole nine. That didn't interest me. I wanted to make things. I was very creative. And so
I was the same way. They thought I was learning disabled because I was bored.
Oh man, same thing. I was bored, talked all the damn time, and wonder why people weren't doing. I was in the second grade, reading on the sixth grade level.
Right.
When I went to the second grade, we were bused out of the hood into the white schools.
My dad was in Detroit after the riots with that worked like a charm, didn't it? The integration busing system. Another example of unintended consequences. Yeah.
But now with me as a child not knowing what I was doing, where I was going, I took to that. As punishment for talking too much, I was put in the corner to read. As punishment for talking too much, after I read the books, I was put in the corner to write Chinese.
It's a hard language to start. Mandarin or
I don't remember.
Just any Chinese
characters. We were doing characters.
So you didn't know what you were writing?
No, it was just these copied characters.
What if you just had a really racist professor?
One thing I gotta add real quick is, they're talking about how they spoke too much in class and they thought they were learning disabled and everything. I taught too little in class when I was, back 40-some years ago. In the beginning, I taught too little. I thought there was, I was learning disabled in a way too. I was held back in school in the beginning because I never talked. And, there was shyness and a lot of stuff that was going on in our household that kind of prompted me in a way to be quieter. But I grew up in a very similar fashion. I had no idea that Steven Crowder grew up. He lived in a car for a while. And I learned a little bit about his past, and it was definitely rougher. It was what you think of with the white privilege and of course this professor grew up in a kind of a disadvantaged way, and I know even in my own life, I was kicked out of high school when I was, I had to go back and get a diploma, and then I ended up going to college, but in little bits. But yeah, I did actually graduate from college until I was in my 30s. But again, I mean, it's like we, people don't always, just because they colored their skin, they don't come from always the privilege you might think they have. And, it's just because you're white and just because you're a white man doesn't mean you're privileged. And, you can say, well, you're taken seriously, you're given opportunities. No, you're not. As a matter of fact, sometimes, like in the case of affirmative action, the opposite is true. But, I mean, it's like I told my son the other night, I said, I was 17 years old, no diploma, packaging fiber, and I was grateful for the job, but for a year, I remember packaging fiber, taking a scoop and scoop fiber out of this big trough type container and filling it into 50 pound bags and sealing those bags shut and stacking those bags up on a pallet. And, that was my job for a year. And it was extremely hot, hard, heavy, physical work. But that's all you could get when you were, a teenager with no diploma. That's all you get. But yeah, so sometimes, people don't have the privilege that you think they have?
As you're writing racist in Chinese just to screw with you.
I thought the teacher was racist. I did because I was the only. There was 3 black kids.
Right.
I was the one that was getting in trouble all the time, and I'm like, you're picking on me.
Right.
So I was telling my mom, this woman doesn't like me. That in the long run, I completely opposite.
Looking back, it was you.
This woman was creating tools for punishment that was encouraging creativity and learning ability.
Turning destructive behavior into productive
ability. Yes. I went to 3rd grade, back to the hood schools. Dude, cutting class, hanging out with the wrong crowds, the whole 9.
Right.
And I remember that to this day. That's where I should have been because the kind of person I was. So anyway, long story short, somewhere in my head, that stuff stuck with me, man. And I lived by that. I read things that I was interested in all the time. I continued to practice.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because I'm interested. You said, so that happened, that teacher, that was when you were going across district in the new...
Yes.
So was that teacher, was she white or was she black?
She was a white, old white woman named Miss Funk.
So she was an old white woman, though, who you thought was racist,
she was racist.
But you realized she was...
wrong. She was actually doing things to encourage me to be better.
And then when you went back to schools where the teachers were primarily black...
No, they were white, too.
They didn't take care of you.
No.
Okay.
It was just shuffling these kids through the school to get out.
Right.
That's it. The punishment was...
Despite the fact that there's more spending in those schools, a lot of people don't know there's more spending in the inner city schools. It's just...
man. In prison. It's the same thing in prison.
Yeah.
So what did they do when we got in trouble in the hood schools? Put you in a room, no book, no nothing. You can't read. You just have to sit there with your head down, don't talk, no nothing. That's destructive.
My teacher, you know what? I have a similar story. It was in the 4th grade. And I was... Do you care about my story? It's kind of Mary's. Sorry, we've got enough, and then we'll get back to it. But what happened was, I was forced, because in French Canada, you want to talk about discrimination, they actually have something called the language police, where if I open, my name is Steven, if I open Steven's Diner, _S, I could be fined and put in jail, because the French writing has to be 2.5 times bigger than the English writing. Even though Canada is an English country, but French Quebec is a French province. It would be like Texas saying, there's a language police, you have to speak Spanish, and you have to write all your signs in Spanish. So not only that, but if you have a single parent born in Quebec, you have to go to French schooling. So I do speak French and English. French is technically my first language because I learned to read and write it first, but I think in English, and I've lost a lot of my French. So what happened was in the 3rd grade, I fell so far behind because I was doing math and geography and history in French, right? And in foreign languages, just because my mom was French, even though my dad was born in Detroit. Right. So because of some kind of a loophole, they finally got me to, in the middle of 3rd grade, no, it would have been middle of 4th grade, they got me switched over. I don't know, we'll have to bleep the names to this, from Monsieur, I think, to Miss, so she was an English teacher.
Okay.
French teacher was very nice, but they thought I was learning disabled, like borderline retarded.
Gotcha.
Moved to an English class where now I'm doing math in English, and this lady, Miss, she was, I want to say South Indian, really harsh, really strict. I did not like her. So I came from a nice teacher who said he's learning disabled. They sent me to a teacher, Miss, who a lot of kids hated, thought was mean, but she stayed after class and taught me long division as long as it took. She didn't do it with a smile on her face, but she cared, and she basically said, your child is not learning disabled. Your child, actually, she said your child may have ADHD, but she said this is a language thing that had happened. And so it's just interesting to me that, you know, it really does bridge that racial divide. It is about actually helping people and wanting to better people regardless of where they are, regardless of their race. And that's my problem with affirmative action on campus, is it's not blind, like your white professor was racially blind and she was just helping a kid. Miss was just helping a kid. Affirmative action says, don't help the white kid, don't help the Asian kid, you have to help the black kid. And that creates another system.
It also perpetuates the idea that you have to just do what you need to do to play the game just as good as everyone else.
So, okay, sorry, I interrupted, but how did you become a professor of hip-hop? Were you a hip-hop dancer?
Yeah, I started breaking in 1983 with breaker, and I started breaking in 1983.
Okay.
And it was very new at the time. So super long story short, man, I just studied it and I performed in theater with the first hip-hop dance company to put hip-hop dance on concert stage, Rennie Harris, in Philadelphia. And from that point on, I found something that kept me engaged all the time. I could make music and dance, I could do set design, I could do all these things. And the stage was an empty canvas for me to do what I had been learning in Miss Funk's class.
Right.
And so, understanding that from 1983 and studying it all the way up to when I started Princeton 2014, I just found myself in different places that gave me an advantage.
That's gotta be. I guess that's gotta be a weird start at Princeton. Like, you know what we need here at Princeton? Hip hop.
Mind blowing, man.
That is right, man. I mean, yeah. I mean, when you really think about it, it's like, but his story. I mean, honestly, both their stories are to me are inspirational in a way. It's like, again, follow what you feel, what's inside of you. Follow that. Keep going in that direction. Something great happened, and it did for both these two men. It did for that professor and for Stephen. Who apparently for a while was living in his car. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to turn it back on so we can kind of finish up with this.
Yeah. So they called me and I said no a couple of times, and then something was like, dude.
You turned them down.
I did. I don't have a degree.
Can you imagine the look at those white people's faces? The deans.
Yo, but I didn't feel I had what it took to be in Princeton. Growing up, I heard Princeton, Harvard, yeah.
Right.
And now I'm here.
And even though you don't have a college degree, it was merit-based because of what you'd accomplished professionally. So again, that's still merit-based. How upsetting would it be to you? I would imagine that in hip-hop, right, specifically in the 80s, probably largely black, correct?
Black and Latino.
Black and Latino. What if they came in and said, there are too many black hip-hop professors. We need to have more white hip-hop professors.
Okay.
And then you said, but that guy sucks.
Well,
and they're like, yeah, but you know what?
I'm going to
there
go
aren't enough of them, so we have lower expectations because we know white people.
I'm going to kind of go a little bit further so we can get enough, kind of see the end of it here. It's almost at the end.
What I'm saying, if let's say there were an audition, okay, let's say you were there, and it seems like you're high level, so you probably were in on a lot of auditions.
I didn't play that game.
Okay.
But
let's say
your question, you're right.
Yeah.
White people got more of the gigs than the blacks did. Example.
Because there weren't enough of them.
No, not even. They just fit the bill. Now I would go into a place that said the casting call would be a guy with a white beard, blue t-shirt, red sneakers. Glasses with piercings, exactly what I would be wearing, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And the person that got the job was completely opposite. White kid, blue eyes, blonde hair, looks like we can put him anywhere we need to put him. And so that is what becomes the visual, being able to identify hip-hop with that thing.
And then you get that NSYNC
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And it's still continuing.
Sure.
So for
but I think we were finding common ground where we both agree in that.
Did he say that's where we get the NSYNC shit or something, or, yeah.
Instance, the best dancer should be the one who gets the job. And even though it wasn't the case, and I'm saying the best student should be the one who gets into school.
I agree. So again, we go back to the beginning of this thing. I said it's not racist. And now I'm thinking maybe it could be, but with more information, we put both these things on the table, and we're both, there's no right or wrong. It's just how can you prove which one you agree with.
Okay, well, so we both have something to think about.
Definitely, man. I'm definitely going to think about that even more.
You going to show me a little bit of the hip-hop thing?
Sure.
All right, thanks, you. Okay, well, this is the thing. Hold on. All right, he's a professor of hip-hop. What do I got to do? So you go...
Guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut the video here, but yeah, I mean... Man, I love that guy's beard. Well, if I grew that, I could see myself with my wife would throw a damn fit though. Or she wouldn't like it, I'll put it that way, but my daughter, oh my God, what are you doing, Daddy? What are you doing? But, anyways, yeah, I, again, love the beard. He looks like he's definitely taking that to a whole new level. But anyways, guys, I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned something from this, and I definitely learned a few things myself. I've done a little bit of research on this stuff, but I've definitely learned a few things from this, and I always do from these interviews, these changed my mind sessions that he has. But anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it here, and I appreciate you watching. And again, if you would, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. You son of a